My apologies for being late. My apologies for being absent. I am back from vacation, and if my lighting is doing me any justice, you can tell that I am bigger and blacker, a la Chris Rock, just without the money. Let's start the show though. Now, nowadays, we're not allowed to say we're anti anything, it's considered wrong. But this man, he shirks it all, and he calls himself anti collector. So, how you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. This was quite an interesting movie. I wish I would have seen it sooner, honestly.
Okay.
'Cause
Let's tease. Let's
very
tease for a second. Let's bring in our other co-host tonight. It's a three for tonight, so we got time to talk. Chrissy, the hater, she's not here to tell us time. E Boogie, how you doing?
I'm doing it swimmingly. How are you?
We are doing well. I'm glad to see. Look at you. You got the light brown skin. We got the medium skin, and we got this Orlando black magic here. Vic, I'm sorry. You were saying earlier though you wish that you had seen this movie. Earlier we're talking about School Daze, Spike Lee's 1988 classic about black collegiate life. That is the synopsis. If you didn't catch that already, but Vic, if you want to just jump into it, by all means.
well, this is a very good description of a dynamic that still holds true. I don't think it's as prevalent as it used to be.
Okay.
But basically, like the dynamic within the black community, um, light skin versus white skin, which is very disappointing in my opinion because I feel like that's one of the things that creates a separation and kind of create and like for me. Because you can even see that described in the movie. You see Lawrence Fishburne wants to kind of like unify everybody for a greater cause. And mind you, it's something that at the time in 1988 was a huge deal. But then the unfortunate part is that a lot of people pretty much, um, which is pretty sad. Um, I can't do anything about the audio. Let me see if I can do something. Am I still okay? Okay. But I hope you can hear me. But like what I was saying is basically that yeah, it's literally just very interesting. It's a reminder of the time. One thing that really stuck out to me was the whole doing the butt song because I always
Mhm.
got that. I got that from Martin. Like when Martin used to just say like doing the butt, ow, ow, you know what I mean. And then when I saw this movie and I saw that entire thing and like I was just like, wow, man, that's crazy. I never realized that's where this came from. So I really regret not watching this movie before. But the reality is that it's very informative, and I recommend this to anybody, honestly, because like this is, and mind you, like Spike Lee made a lot of joints of that. This is fire. Like I'm surprised it doesn't have as much hype as the other movies does. Because yeah, this is great. I mean, and the biggest thing that I got out of this is just that like the historically black colleges should get funding from the people, should get funding from the people in the culture. Like the guy was saying, the yeshivas get it, all of the Catholic schools they get it, but then when it comes to the HBCUs, that's not necessarily the case. So like it really describes just a lot of things in the community, good and bad, and I really appreciate it. And mind you, this was over 30 years ago, so it's like it's amazing. And mind you, the things that they were saying, a lot of the things that they were saying, they definitely wouldn't be able to get away with today. So in that sense, I think it's a little, it feels refreshing to just hear some of those things. But then at the same time, it's like, wow, now yeah, they definitely wouldn't be able to get away with this. But, and, the other reason why I'm sad is because I remember seeing the commercials all the time. There are certain parts in this movie that I remember seeing repeated in the commercials, like on Channel 11. Like this movie used to play all the time, and I just never watched it. And I regret not watching it because it's amazing. And my favorite part, really, the one that described basically what everything that's happening in this movie the most, is the hair song. The
Mhm.
whole thing about going back and forth with like the girls, the light skinned girls trying to be white and the dark skinned girls being jigaboos and all this other stuff. And I was like, whoa. I really wonder how this would get over right now. I think it would be very, very difficult. I mean, like it would just be a problem now. You know what I mean? But I don't know. I don't know. It's just incredibly interesting.
Mhm. You raised some good questions. I'll go into that when I do my final thoughts. But just a quick question before Aaron, if you want to go next, or I can go, it doesn't matter. But you said that you saw it playing several times before on TV. Did you know of the movie, or you just realized that you had seen bits and pieces of it, but never realized what it was?
I never realized what the movie was. No,
Mhm.
I never realized specifically what it was, what it catered to, what it was about, any of those things. Like I'm going fresh right now. Like, I realized it was a Spike Lee joint as soon as I saw Spike Lee, and I was
Okay.
like, oh, okay, now I see where we're going. You know what I mean? And it's very, very Spike Lee. It's very uplifting and informative and telling the story that's just real, you know. And that's and that's why I continue the whole thing with the anti-collective, because you basically have two Greek groups that are fighting each other based on, more than anything, their ideologies, but their ideologies come from how light or dark skin they are.
Mhm.
Which is a very, very, very interesting dynamic that a lot of people aren't necessarily aware of. Especially if you're not part of the Black community. This type of thing is very hard to grasp if you're like a Hispanic and you're recently coming into the country. This is a very, very difficult thing to grasp, because this type of dynamic in this country. But yeah, I'm done. I talked a lot.
No, I think that you touch on some things, and to your credit, not that you need me to say this, I don't necessarily think that. I, to be fair, I don't know that any generation they had many people who were able to digest a deep thought. Though in times past, when society wasn't based around clickbait, we had a longer attention span to actually digest deeper conversation. So it was more common. Today,
Mhm.
it's like piecemeal. But I think it is important to realize that the audience for this movie, even though anybody can watch it, is, and I'll say this: I don't know if it's black. Black is a general term that we use in the United States. We being African Americans, ADOS, FBA. Okay, but it is for African Americans in that sense. Though people in the diaspora, the African diaspora, I believe can understand it, because there are elements in that. The same way when you go to your cousin's house, there are elements that you recognize of your own home because it's one branch family. Okay. And I say that in a way that we're allowed to say on YouTube without going too deep into it and cutting into other time. But I would be very curious to see how other communities watch it, how they interpret it, considering that their experience in the diaspora is a slight variation of my own coming up in this country, and my people's, meaning my ancestors, being generations hence in this country and not having been removed since the big removal. I'll say it that way. But Aaron, did you want to go next, or did you want me to go?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Um, this was a rewatch for me. I've seen it quite a few times. I think I saw it probably the first time in my teenage years. And I had already been familiar with a lot of Spike Lee's work beforehand, and like a lot of his other works, this was very, very layered. I mean, there was an overall theme happening, which kind of, to me, I interpret it as more of an individualistic type
Yeah.
of thinking versus a more global type of thinking. As far as the very beginnings, as we get deeper into it, of course, we get the Black college experience from Spike having gone to Morehouse and Clark Atlanta. So we really are getting, this is almost like a testimony of his to Black college life. But there are so many more layers that are happening in this film. It's almost hard to keep up. If you're not familiar with his work, it can read as a little preachy. If that's just not a part of your culture. That's why, to me, this is like a very Black movie, because it talks about a lot of themes that come up in Black culture, not only on the activism side and with that first theme of kind of that individual thinking versus globalist thinking, but they talk about colorism in the movie. They talk about higher education and why we don't invest in our own universities, who their funding is coming from. They talk about well, I don't want to get too deep into it, but they do talk about kind of the feminine aspect to a lot of college life. And I thought that was really interesting and important that he made sure to include that factor to the story, because a lot of times we don't. It's just not something that we see, especially in like college or high school, whatever, that age of film casting. Speaking of casting, the casting was amazing in this movie. It's almost like you forget, but it's like when you go to your grandma's house and you go in for a big hug and it feels familiar. That's how this cast felt to me. Like, yeah. I recognize so many different people, and it's like, I don't know, it's like 90s Black Hollywood. It was really cool to see all those people together, and exhibiting their different talents, because Spike is very kind of avant-garde with his directorial style, but also there's a lot of throwback in his style as well. We got to see a lot of the different talents of these different actors and actresses, and I thought that was cool and a nice way to marry the theme with kind of like this big movie kind of feel. I thought it definitely lent to the weight of the movie, I'll say. But that's all I have for now.
Aaron, I think you made a great point, and I think the highlight for me was when you said the Black excellence on screen, right? I can't remember what movie we were watching, but I think either myself or somebody else, I know on the show, obviously, they discussed it, that we don't see that outside of it being a film in Black hands. That's not a thing you see. You might have a gem among other gems, right, of other actors, because I'm not saying only Black people have talent, right? But you don't get to see all these different facets of Black life. And that's another thing that you mentioned in this movie, that it's not one depiction. And this is 1988. In 1989, he does Do the Right Thing, talking about Spike Lee. And in that one, it's very popular. And the thing that people say often is that no one is portrayed as being right or wrong, per se. It's more like he's showing a portrait, a real life portrait of life in the world. Now, somebody else who I think gets a hard time for a different reason is Tarantino, and we did a Death Proof, and you could say that Tarantino does a surreal, real world thing, but I want to emphasize his dialogue. His dialogue, which oftentimes, quote unquote, gets him into trouble, or people other than, as they say, the violence. But where in the world do you not see violence? Where in the world do you not hear people talk like that every day? Now, granted, it's not so eloquent, and that's shout out to his writing style, right? But he's writing it true to life. In this way, Spike Lee, he shows in his movies, right, that original works, he's showing you slices of what I call Americana. Americana is not just the farmer and his wife, right? That is part of Americana, but we too are also part of Americana. And to my earlier point, that's not something that we always get to see on screen. And I love when it's in somebody's hands who actually loves the people on screen, much as I do when Quentin Tarantino does it, because he loves his characters, right? And that's obviously a larger conversation. Now, School Days is my pick. Typically, the tradition is that the person who picks it, they go first. But everybody says that I talk too much. I'm verbose. I'm the Rachel Maddow of this program. That may be. Um, Let me say, and I'll just run down some of the things. Some of the things I already mentioned. So if I mentioned them twice before, or have already been mentioned, if I mentioned them twice, please forgive me. Let me shout out again the white portraits in the black school president's office. A lot of people don't know that a lot of HBCUs were actually founded by white people. And up until the early 20th century, even to the midway point, they were run by white heads or white boards, right? That's why the chairman of the board and the black president of Mission College were saying that somebody said, "Ain't I Americana?" I love that. That's a reference to something else too. But they were saying that we have to tread carefully, to Vic's point, because the Jewish schools are taken care of by Jewish Americans. The Catholic schools are taken care of by Catholic Americans. But for whatever reason, black people, on whole, in mass, right, they don't take care of black institutions. Now, that's a larger conversation. I don't know if I'm allowed to have that on YouTube. If you've been watching the show, you know I'm not afraid to go there, and I will. But I'll save that and I'll touch on that a little bit in my final thoughts, right? But notice the things that in the bullet points that I'm bringing up in my best stuff, okay? But pay attention to that, right? So again, tied into that is the lack of financial support for HBCUs. Again, who was it? I think I can't remember if it was the president or the chairman said that we're just wards of the state, essentially, because the federal government is the one funding us. And a lot of people had a lot to say about Trump. And again, this is not a political thing that I'm saying right now, but that he's made it so that HBCUs don't have to keep coming back every year or every so often to get funding, that it's in perpetuity, right? But again, arguably, it's to our shame, and I say ours, African Americans, that we need that. Are we not excellent enough? Do we not excel in so many different fields that the federal government has to fund these schools? Okay. There are certain things called easy layups. I'm just putting it out there. I'm going there. I like that this movie is an exploration of black masculinity. A lot of people, they think that I come down hard on the women in these movies that we review. I come down hard on the men too, right? And I keep the same energy. I'm going to tie in the black masculinity to two different scenes that we see in this movie. Later in the film, we find out that the president of the Gammas, he wants to dump Jane, so to speak, right? Julian wants to dump Jane. And so he orchestrates this whole thing, right? Because he knows that it will hurt Dap, who is his enemy, but he also wants himself to look good, and he's using it as a way to get rid of Jane, right? And he says to Jane, "If you really love me, you'll do this thing to humiliate yourself," right? I'm using coded language because we're on another platform, right? And he manipulates her emotion, her feelings for him, right? And gives up his covering of her, and puts it in her head to do that and to sleep with another man. Now, did she have faculty that she could have said no? Yeah. But the onus goes to Julian because he was supposed to be her covering. Now, granted, they weren't married, but he's supposed to be her covering. If something popped off, everybody would have said that he's supposed to be the first one to bleed for her before she has to bleed. He was wrong for that. He was wrong for that. Does that happen? How often does it happen? I don't know. I don't know who would know the answers to that, but it happens, and I like that Spike Lee showed it. And granted, we don't get a true ending where everything is tied up neatly, because life is not tied up neatly. That goes into the early point that Aaron made, and I backed up. But I like that we see a realization of his shame when Julian is walking to the forefront of everybody in Mission College, and he's ashamed of what he did. And there's an acknowledgement in his eyes and in his horror when he looks at Dap, and Dap acknowledges, "At least you woke up." To his point, please wake up. Okay. Vic talked about the hair salon scene. Again, I at first, because many of the I forget that, I think they're the alphas, but many of the alphas, they are fairer skinned, right? In our world, we would say they pass the paper bag test, right? As we know. Uh, which we know of, right? But really, it was about the texture and the hair. I don't know the different, the 1A, 4A, whatever like that. But people in that world, they understand these different terminologies, and you hear this a lot on TV, and that's what they're talking about. And I think more than anything, that speaks to Vic's point, because especially in Latin America, right? If I can go there, if I'm allowed to talk about a place that I'm not from, um, without offending anybody, right? It's not so much about color, because the society wasn't set up, because everybody looks like everybody else. So we have to differentiate different ways, and one is more preferential than the other. And I think that song speaks to it more so, and it's much more subtle than just being a light versus dark. It's more the texture of the hair, because as we see, there are darker skinned girls and lighter skinned girls on either side. It's more of the hair texture. Whereas when we see Miss Mission College, she's fairer skinned, and it's the fetishization. The gamma fetishize the lighter skinned women. The Miss Mission College, they fetishize that. It's the proximity to whiteness without crossing over, right? Because I'm still down for the cause, but I want to get as closest to the line as I can and possibly blur it or smudge out. And again, that's a conversation that happens in Black America. I think to Spike's point, I think to the point that everybody's making on this show, that's a conversation that happens a lot in Black America. I don't know that everybody can appreciate that, but then again, I don't know that this movie is for everybody. The audience isn't for everybody, though everybody can watch this movie. You have to chew on that statement, right? Sometimes you have to be part of the family in order to understand the subtlety and the nuance of all the different flavor wherein they're in. It doesn't mean that you can't appreciate though and say, hey, this is a great art piece. You just might not catch everything, and you might need some people to explain some portions of the meal, right? I like that they talked about, when we see, shout out to Sam Jackson, who apparently has been in everything just like Morgan Freeman, who was in a scene reminiscent to the scene that he's in a year later in Coming to America, when he's in the KFC. And the guys who live around Mission College, and who are the people, the Black people who live around these HBCUs, right, who work these quote unquote blue collar jobs and factory jobs and everything like that, and hourly wages, they're not going to become the talented 10th, right? And Sam Jackson speaks on that. So it's not only the exploitation of Black masculinity, but the exploitation of Black economics and the social stratification, right? And I love that too, because that's not forgotten. And I like that the guys in the car, they had a conversation and they said, are we just as bad because we do it in a different way? Can we, the heroes of the movie, quote unquote heroes, also be the villains? That's something that I think this modern generation, I'm not putting on Generation Z, but I'm saying in 2021, that's something that we don't understand, is nuance. That we can also do a lot of good things, quote unquote, because who is good, right? And we could be on the right side of a lot of things and still be wrong in our thinking about some things. That's called being human. The difference is we sit back and we chew it, and we allow ourselves to sit in the fact that we can't always be right. Sometimes we're lacking, and we need to self analyze. That's a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful scene for me. I mentioned earlier when Julian disrespects Jane like that. I didn't appreciate that, but I like that they showed in the movie, because it does happen. Another thing that happens in this movie is when Julian wants to apologize to Rachel. I mean, when Dap, wants to apologize to Rachel, because he's against fraternities and sororities and everything like that, and he is what we would call pro-Black, maybe to a fault, and maybe that's what he comes to the realization in at that point in the movie, right? And he says, I'm sorry that I didn't support you the same way, I'm assuming, as she has supported him all 4 years, right? That's the way that the scene is set up, at least the way I interpret it, right? And you see him calling out. And the scene, to me, reminded me of that famous scene. I forget which movie it is. It's, I think it's John Hughes movie where the guy is, John Cusack is holding up the what are the boombox above his head, you know what I mean, and he's playing the music for Molly Ringwald's character. I think that's Pretty in Pink, right?
No,
Pretty in Pink?
I think you're talking about High Fidelity.
Is that High Fidelity where he's holding up the boombox? You know which one I'm talking about. And
Where he works at a record store.
no. It's an old '80s movie. It's not that. That was the '90s one. There's a movie in the '80s where he's holding up a boombox and he's playing her favorite song on the radio. Molly Ringwald looks outside. I think it's Pretty in Pink.
It's not. It's not Pretty in Pink. I've seen it a cajillion times.
It's one of those, but I think it's Molly Ringwald. You know what I'm saying? It's a famous thing, but it reminded me of that. And the point that I'm getting to is, you see all those other women who open up things who are not Rachel, even Rachel's roommates, right? Dorm mates. They're mocking him. But think about how much it takes for just a human being to say, hey, I'm coming. There are no cell phones. There's no texting. This is 1988. And he's coming there as a man should and saying, I was wrong. And I didn't do for you what you did for me. And I'm coming here to your face to apologize to you. And the women there are mocking him. This is also something that you see in the Black community. Does it happen in other communities? I'm not part of the other communities. In a way, I don't give a damn. I care about my community in that sense selfishly. I like that Spike Lee showed that. They dumped water on him. And none of those Black women corrected that. That was wrong. I like that they showed that. Again, these are portraits, these are slices of true life in this movie that I really, really did enjoy. And also, lastly, when Half Pint goes and he celebrates what he does, right? That he slept with Jane and everything like that. I'm not gonna call it the word that'll get us flagged, but he knew that she didn't want. I don't do it because this is YouTube. We don't own YouTube, right? But he knew that she really wasn't part of that, right? But his desire to be accepted by the Gammas, to be a quote unquote man, again, exploration of Black masculinity. I finally want to be accepted. This is my chance. And she's the most beautiful of the outfits. Forgive me if I'm saying this wording wrong. She's the most beautiful. I'm not going to turn this down, even though I know that she's not here. She's not with this, right? He failed at being a man in the test, the true test of what it is to be a man. Forget being a Gamma. You passed the Gamma test and you failed at the manhood test. That was your shot. And when he goes to his cousin Dap and he celebrates, and Dap is happy for him at first. Oh, okay, great. You lost your virginity or whatever. I know that was important to you. And then he says, with who? And then he says, how is that possible? And he says, oh, so-and-so, Giancarlo's character, he gave her to me. He gave her to me. And he throws his cousin against the wall. He says, how could you do this? Are you so stupid? I like that a Black man checked another, and I can't call him a man because of what he did, but he checked a Black male. That is what's supposed to happen. There's supposed to be accountability. The same way I said that Rachel should have checked those other ones, even if she was upset with Dap, that has nothing to do with those other females in there. The same way, everybody's like, hey, be quiet when Half Pint was screaming in the thing, right? But when his cousin found out what he did, he said, you are no longer my family. I don't condone that. He checked them. We need to have that. And I'm not saying that we don't have that. I'm just celebrating that they showed that there's accountability in the Black community. Again, slices, true life portraits of Black America. Because in most movies, they would not have shown that. They wouldn't have taken the time. I say a lot that I don't like cookie cutter things. That's why, because life is not cookie cutter. And even though he says it directly, that's because he has a moral compass. And there's nothing for him to think about, and he completely disowns them. And I thought that was a beautiful scene. Lastly, the final one, when he says, when he looks in the camera, Dap, Lawrence Fishburne's character, and he says, please wake up. I thought it was a great ending. We are overdue for commercials, I'm sure, of some sort. We're going to hit some commercials, come back with final thoughts. Or not. Let's play the first one, though. This
Pocahontas.
She
was the daughter of a chief.
She has her mother's spirit. She goes wherever the wind takes her.
Come down here!
And she lived a life of freedom.
No, not that way.
Pocahontas. Another term at Rydell High with Michelle Pfeiffer and Maxwell Caulfield.
Tonight we're gonna show you how to do it right. We're gonna start.
There's more romance and rock and roll in Grease 2.
All right, we're back. E Boogie, Anti Collective, EU. EU, by the way, is the band that sings the butt. They're a DC Go-Go band. That's why I put it there as my name tonight. But who would like to go off on final thoughts?
Okay. Well, I really, really enjoyed this movie because of the subject matter and because of just about everything that you depicted right now. Because it really spoke to a lot of dynamics that you don't really see expressed anymore. However, this was 1988, and for lack of a better phrase, there was definitely a lot more freedom in what could be expressed and what could be said without being offensive. There definitely wasn't such a big cancel culture, and people were definitely able to speak out. Now, the unfortunate part that I see is that I feel like now the division is not as big, but now the division is there for other reasons, even to the point of political. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like a lot of this is financial because at the end of the day, this country is a business. Every single person has a social security number, and you pay taxes under that social security number. That's all Uncle Sam cares about. Therefore, every other community pretty much has the ability and the responsibility to take care of themselves. Now, this dynamic, in my opinion, has spread out into other cultures as well. And why do I say that? Because there are people that come here united. 20 years pass and nobody's talking to each other over money. And I think that a lot of this separation or anti-collective is pretty much more than anything, aside from light skin and dark skin and hair texture like it was back then. I think it's a lot more financial now. I think it's a situation of I'm doing good, so fuck the rest of y'all type of thing. You know what I mean? And that's why I see the anti-collective. I really, really, really like this movie. I think that it should definitely be shown to the younger audience to have an understanding. And you know what I mean? Especially like the part when Lawrence Fishburne was talking about, you marched on Washington, but that was 20 years ago, and look at what's going on now. And mind you, this movie was 30 years ago, and now we're talking about BLM, right? But BLM is a phrase, Black Lives Matter. And why did that come out? Because somebody got killed, and then somebody else, the person that did the killing, got away with it. And all they did was get a slap on the wrist. This is why people were upset. But now it's been politicized into being some kind of big democratic bullshit. But the reality of the situation is that till this day, we still have a lot of these issues. And I really, really, really like how powerful this movie is. And I love the end. You know, Lawrence Fishburne just like wake up, because I even till this day, a lot of people need that. There is a very very little small collective, and I think that the main reason above all else, especially nowadays, is a financial one. Because everybody's just trying to get their bag and keep it moving, and that's it. They don't give a shit about nobody. So yeah, yeah. There's a lot to say. There really is a lot to say, but I'm gonna attempt to just leave it there. But I thumbs up. You know what? I always do that. Thumbs up. Yeah, that's
All right, we got a thumbs up from Anti Collective. Aaron, what do you think about this movie?
I'll dive right in. I think the movie's great. It is a really, really great film to introduce yourself to Spike Lee's technique. His directorial style is very distinctive. And he really, I think he does a really good job of portraying what it is to be Black in America. And he can even do it just sonically and visually with no dialogue, and it still resonates.
Yeah.
I think it's an excellent film. He made great use with the casting. It's epic. It's definitely some of his best work. And if I can be derail a little bit from what I've said earlier, I really like how he directs women in his films. I always feel like I can relate to them in some way, and I see myself in the female cast in all of his films. So definitely a thumbs up from me.
So far we have 2 thumbs up. E-Boogie, Anti Collective. Something that Aaron, you just said right at the end, and I forgot to mention earlier. There are love scenes in this movie. One, I think, is more of a fetishization. I mentioned that earlier. That's the one with Julian and Jane. But I want to talk about the love scene with Dap and Rachel. And then also when she's drying him off at the end. Those are very intimate without being exploitative. And I love that. And I think you made a great point. I'm sorry I forgot to mention that earlier, but credit to you for bringing that up on the show. Vic, what are you saying?
That hair licking shit. What was that about? That was just ridiculous.
Say that again.
All of the hair licking that Gina was doing.
It was fetishization. It was the proximity to whiteness without being white. For instance,
I get that, but oh my god, that was.
I won't mention any names, but a lot of times you see. Okay, I'll put it to you this way. When somebody is famous in the Black community, they get money quick or whatever like that. However they get money, their children before the fame and money might look like them. After they're a couple of shades lighter. The longer they go on in that fetishization, they're lighter and they're lighter, they're lighter. And you could look at many different people. And because there are children involved, I'm not going to say sadly, but wherever their mentality is, for the reason they're doing that, I say sadly for that. You can understand that. Hopefully the audience can understand that as well. But in this movie, at least, it comes down to fetishization. And I think he was calling attention to that you're fetishizing that. That's why, she's licking the branding, obviously supposed to be like a Q branding, but in this movie, they're gammas. She's licking that. They're smelling the hair, the texture of the hair, because that's what they idolize. That's what they worship. Whereas when you see Dap and Rachel, it's each other. They're looking each other in the eyes. You see what I'm saying? That's the sensuality. Even when she's drying him off. And then when he says, easy, that tickles, she says, don't act like, she doesn't say don't act brand new, but basically like, we've been here before. And the fact that he trusts her, that's a vulnerable spot. We see that scene again, something similar in, it's a different kind of movie, The Last Samurai, when the woman is armoring up Tom Cruise's character, and he takes the more passive role, the more feminine role, right? And he's looking at her. He doesn't take his eyes off of her as she's covering him up like that. It's a very intimate scene, and I did like the way he did that. I'll say this. Obviously, this movie's a thumbs up for me. Aaron was right. Black excellence on full display. But shout out to Spike for continuing that. And let me just say this for those who are watching who might not be part of the family or branch thereof, right? Um, I'm not saying that you don't matter, and I'm not saying, that I believe in supremacy or anything like that. But listen, I love my mom and my dad and my cousins before I love anybody else. Why? Because those are the first faces I see. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it doesn't take away from anything else. You understand that as you need to understand it. But Black culture, for those who are not part of that tree, Black culture is not what's played on the radio. For the most part, it's not what's released by Hollywood. It is a fraction, if you can even say that, of what is allowed to be released by Hollywood or allowed to be played on the radio. Chew on what I just said. Thumbs up for me, 3 thumbs up for this movie. The executive consultant, who is away right now, he said that he's going to be watching this movie, I think, sometime this weekend. But we have Grease 2 coming up. We have Pocahontas coming up. A very accurate movie by Walt Disney Company. That's me being facetious, but I thank you for tuning in. I apologize again that it's so late, but as always, we appreciate you. And this is us signing off on UPRE. Catch us on YouTube. Good night, everybody. All right, there's no outro. This is live, but whatever. We'll fix this in post. But we are out of here, okay?